Okay, now that you've hit record, we're on.
I'm a little off.
We're back. And it has been a while, and we apologize, but life got in the way. But we do want to keep this football chatter going. It's Gridiron 360, ladies and gentlemen. We're getting back at you. I got my man Dave with me, as usual.
Hello, brother.
It's been a while, man. How goes it?
Goes well, man. Part of the reason why we have to take a little bit of break is there's a mourning period. There's an adjustment back to real life, which is, man, what do I do on Saturdays and Sundays now? I do adult things, and it's a little bit of a conundrum there, trying to get back into it. For those who one, I guess I want to say, because we haven't had one since, a little congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs and the LSU Tigers.
That's right.
Unfortunately, I know that came at the cost of Clemson, who I still think is an unbelievable team. But those were our two champions to end our college and pro season of the 2019 is over, buddy. It's 2020.
Yep. I was fortunate enough to get down to the game, and it was a good one. Got a little out of hand at the end, but we gave them a good fight, especially early on. That's my Clemson Tigers. Buddy of mine asked me, when did you leave? I told him we left just about 2 minutes just to kind of beat the crowd. Mm-hmm. And he was surprised I hadn't left earlier. And I told him, I like good football. I didn't like to see him get my team beat, but it was exciting to watch that LSU offense and Burrow and what he did this year under their coordinator, Joe Brady. And Jamar Chase had a great game. So it was fun to watch it. And then likewise, like you said, Kansas City Chiefs, it was a good Super Bowl. It was a good season. Yep. It was good to see Mahomes get there. Andy Reid finally getting the ring on his finger.
Absolutely.
My man Sammy Watkins from Clemson gets one. Good for him. And it's on to 2020. So we're going to start, it's a mishmash. We always kind of talk, as you know, if you listen, NFL, college, fantasy. Fantasy we're going to put to the side for a bit. But NFL and college now intertwine as we come into the combine and the draft. But we're going to actually focus a little bit today on the hot topics because we will want to do our little mock drafts, but we feel like, it's all speculation until free agency really kind of plays itself out in our minds. And we will talk about that, though. We'll talk about free agency, but not today. We don't want to keep it too long. We're definitely going to keep these in the back half of the season as short and sweet as possible. We're going to talk collective bargaining agreement with the NFL, the CBA. And Dave's going to kind of go over what's out there, what's on the table, as some of you may or may not know, the importance of an agreement for this will really depend on whether there's going to be a strike next year, if there's an agreement to happen or not. Yep. So for the fan, we want to see it get done. Yep. But it is a business, and as we went into it, and even you said, on the surface, it looks like, maybe it's an even deal, but if you dig into some topics, does it weigh more for the owners, and do the players need to negotiate? It seems like there's a pretty firm stance where the owners are, and so that could be, again, as it does seem like we're coming to some sort of a solution fast on this, faster than expected. There may be a roadblock before we know it, but we don't want that to happen. Maybe that's our excitement to not have a strike. We'll get into all that. So, Dave, why don't you take us away and kind of talk about, hit some talking points on the new collective bargaining agreement proposed.
Absolutely. Well, just a little bit to help you understand is I don't think any of us, this podcast is all about the fans, and we're two fans here, and hopefully those you listen are big fans as well. So really our big thing, because unfortunately none of us get a revenue share in this, even though we actually are the revenue creators.
Yes.
With all the stuff that we buy. But it is important, and it's kind of important to understand where it's going to go. And the reason why I thought it was important for us to discuss this is, one, because obviously a work stoppage would be a bad thing. It would make those Saturdays in the fall a lot less fun. Or Sundays.
It would make Saturdays even more critical.
Yeah, true. Yeah, good point.
I mean, people, you brought it up earlier. People, And I'm sure it's because of the high profile that the NFL is. It is the sport for this country and really the entire world in terms of how it generates revenue. Soccer obviously is huge internationally. But the fact of the matter is I forgot where I was going with that point.
That's okay because listen, we're getting back in the saddle.
No. I mean, this is a very, very. Oh, I remember where I was going. You brought it up earlier that NFL stadium. If baseball strikes, they're going to hurt in terms of selling out games. Whereas NFL stadiums, even on strikes, tend to sell at least the majority of their tickets.
Yeah. As of the last, 30 years. The NFL gets them back regardless. I mean,
so that weighs in favor of an owner, obviously.
Yeah. And we've seen in the NFL, unlike some other sports, we've seen scab players in the NFL since, what was that, in the early 80s, mid 80s, I know it was. I can't remember the exact year. So, they obviously, there have been some heels dug in the past, but fans just keep coming back. It's football, whereas baseball in 94, when they went through that, they had some amazing years coming. I mean, again, not to dwell on it too long, but I mean, I still think of the Montreal Expos, and if you're not a baseball fan, it won't make sense. But this was a team that, if you went back and looked and go look at their team, was loaded with talent, and yet there's a team that, after the strike, actually ended up getting moved. Didn't they play in Cuba for a little while before they went to Washington?
Yeah, I think so.
Something like that. Not Cuba. They played somewhere international. Yeah. But you just see it. It damages it, whereas the NFL
Puerto
survives
Rico
it.
Or something.
Yeah, the NFL can survive it, but it gets very contentious. So here's the thing: this is where I'm not and Bill, you're not either. We're not lawyers. We're not negotiators. I don't need to get into the 150 pages, probably 3,000 pages contract.
And quite frankly, and the talk about it for too long will start to bore me.
Yeah,
absolutely. I just want to, we just want to be on the surface, like you said earlier. We really are here for the fans and trying to take it, because we're fans too, from that perspective. What's important to us,
and it's kind of I want to understand a little bit about why, when you see a tweet or a thing from like J.J. Watt recently said this thing's garbage, we should throw it away. Why is he saying that? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down and we're going to talk about some of these points because really it's talking about what it's going to do to impact free agency. And this collective bargaining agreement, even though the current one runs through the end of next year, this one could actually change the landscape a little bit, even in this year's free agent class. So this is why we thought it's important. So I think the biggest thing that every fan has heard about the agreement is, there is a proposal here that is about a 17-game schedule, which, obviously adding an extra game is huge. From the player side, in a simplistic form, they worry about player safety and am I going to get the extra revenue, because now I'm, sacrificing my livelihood, aka my body, for an extra game. Obviously to the fan, for us, it's great. You want to give me 18 games, you want to give me 20, I don't really care. You can give me as many as you want. I will continue to watch it. But the players do have to, be aware of that. So I'm going to break down just the key points, and I'm going to talk about some things that I think are important and that have come up. Number one, you hear 17-game season, just to understand that, the potential for that to start. I haven't been able to really get clarity in this and looking around, but there is a possibility that they could get into this collective bargaining agreement and still not get to 17 games through the pace. And I want to talk about how that impacts it's revenue sharing is where a lot of that comes to.
Okay, before you jump into that, because it may be a question that listeners may have. So when would this 17-game season begin? If it were approved, and obviously maybe it's depending on it. So say they approved it next week.
Okay.
Would it be next year that it would be, or the following?
The way the language is written is the idea is to put the 17-game season in place in 2021.
Okay.
This is
to
understand this is really, it's an 11-year agreement, but understand it's cannibalizing in a way the last year of the current collective bargaining agreement.
More of a 10.
So it's more of a 10-year in that aspect. The important part is and I'm going to actually, let me get into this as I go. Let me just simply state it's a 17-game season is the concept with a 3-game preseason. So you're going to drop a preseason game.
Right.
You're going to gain a regular season. Yep.
And now the preseason used to be 3, right? 2 or 3?
I believe it was 3, but that's been quite some time.
It has been some time since we bounced the 4.
And understand, it's really, it could be for one team, it was a 5 game. I didn't see anything about the Hall of Fame game, whether that's going to continue. My guess is it would. So it might be like 2 teams play 4 games. You know what I mean? That extra game. Somebody always gets an extra preseason.
Okay.
Two teams get an extra preseason
All right,
game.
continue.
But the idea is we're going to cut one off the back. Now, interesting, just kind of a side note. The belief is the NFL does not want to start their season or doesn't want to start their season early. They want to do it after Labor Day. So, which is traditionally the case. College football starts, then pro.
Yes.
That will not change, why that's important is that will push the season a little bit later into the season for us fans that want to have a little bit more in January and in February. All right. The revenue share, and this is what's interesting, I'll get into whether this 17-game plays. Current revenue share in the NFL is 47% to the players, 53% to the owners. In the last in a collective bargaining agreement that was done in early 2006, I think 2007, the owners took back. It was a very player actually friendly contract, and they took back some of that revenue sharing. With the proposed 17-game season, the idea is to get them back half of that 3% they lost on the 50-50 split. So here's how this would break down. In 2020, this is where I said it would kind of cannibalize the end of the current deal. Their revenue share will remain 47-53. That is regardless of whether a 17-game season is implemented in 2021. In 2021, if a 16 games, or excuse me, it's a 16-game schedule that year, meaning they did not implement the 17-game schedule.
So that it was not they didn't come to an agreement in time, but maybe there is an agreement. It's just not in time for 21,
However,
21.
they've fleshed out that decision being made. If it's only 16 games, their revenue sharing will go to 48%. That's again, so restate that. If 2021, technically the first year of the 10-year deal, they play only 16 games, it will go to 48%. If they play 17 games, it will go to 48.5%. Here's the interesting part. If they do not agree on a 17-game schedule for that season in 2022, they will stay at 47%. So they will get none of their gains for the life of that 10-year deal. So in essence, they revert back to 47%, and so they get nothing from a revenue sharing standpoint. The players make no gains in that area.
It's just what it's been.
Yes.
It doesn't move from what it's been. I mean, they get money, but it's not. They don't increase with
So the enticement is there. Like if they really want increased revenue share, there's no way around it other than 17 games. So the owners are playing that move. So something just to bring in, which I thought was
before you get further, let me ask you a question. So what in your opinion, if this thing doesn't, if they're able to come to an agreement, but it's not in time for the 17-game season to be implemented in 2021, say it's 2022,
right,
or something like that, how does that affect the tenure of the 10-year collective bargaining agreement? Do you think the owners are willing to give on a year? And let me I guess before I go into that, do you think that could still cause a strike?
Well, I mean, I guess in reality, understand there's two different things. You'll hear the word.
If they have an agreement in place, they can't strike, right?
Yes, they can. Here's the difference. You hear two different words thrown around. The last time the players were left, and this is just standard union negotiation with a company or an entity. Last time a lockout occurred. A lockout occurs when a contract expires and there's not an agreement, and so the owners will not field the product because there is no agreement with which to work under. A strike occurs when there is an agreement and the workforce walks out. So if that was to happen, it can't stop a strike, meaning the NFL could strike tomorrow. They could decide to walk out on their contract. Now, that's null and void. I'm sure there's a lot of language written in that. So at any point they could strike. Now, then you get into legal issues and whether they can go to courts and force things and all that. And that is way above my legal understanding by a country mile. So yes, you technically can always have a strike. But the reality is they know they're walking into this. What I think the idea behind this is to force the hand so it doesn't drag out through the process. Like, don't decide 5 years down. You don't want to say, well, you didn't agree to it this year, so we're not giving you the money, but any year you could agree to do it. It doesn't help the NFL ownership in that matter. So they want to force the decision to be made early in the contract, I think is the point.
All right.
And I think the players would know that by not agreeing to 17 games in after 2021, that we've just in essence agreed to 47%. So just kind of a point now. 47, 48.5 doesn't sound like much, but you're talking about a league this was after their DirecTV deal that I think was up to $15 billion. I think they're now north of $16 billion. So you're talking about a significant amount of money. So I want to make these points about shared revenue, which I found interesting. I didn't know this. Shared revenue, you think, okay, giant pool of money. We cut it how we said we're going to cut it. Understand right now,
this is the 53-47.
Yeah, it does not include things like stadium naming rights. Stadium naming rights have had contracts upwards of $500 million.
Yes.
So you're talking about a huge chunk of change. It also, in some cases, does not include like premium seating. And as you know, as a Giants season ticket holder, what's the big thing that happened to you that changed from many moons ago that now you have? You have PSLs.
That's right.
And so you have
personal seat license.
Yeah, so you've got these additional revenues, and you can speak to it that they are large for the average mortal, not to the athletes, but to the average human being. And that's, again, why you see more corporate buying. So kind of an important part that it's not as much of like, hey, they get 47% of or 48.5% of the 16 billion. There are various different things that play into that, and the players aren't really getting that big of a piece of pie as it might appear. Okay, so let's talk about, I want to just hit through these because these were bullet points, just things to be aware of. The salary cap minimum. This is something that's kind of interesting, has been going on. They've done this when they instituted salary caps in all the sports that have them, is that you had to spend a certain amount of the salary cap in order to stay compliant. It was 89% of the minimum to have a minimum salary cap. That's kind of why you'll hear in sports about people trading for dead contracts. It's so they can have that money count towards their salary cap to make sure they stay at the minimum. This is generally for your less financially sound franchises that can't spend as much money. That percentage was at 89%. It moved up to 90%. Again, seems kind of marginal, but what's interesting is those salary cap test periods are over in this contract over 3 years, then 4 years. So what I want to say to you is, and how this all plays out is for the bean counters, but it doesn't mean you have to be at 89% every year. It means you have to average being at 89% over a 3-year period. Okay. So you can fall under that and pay less. I kind of envision that more in teams that start dumping salaries and tanking, which we're seeing a lot more in sports from the rebuild concepts that have come out.
Right.
So it's actually a fairly long window and something that may be kind of interesting. So what that means is players might not be getting paid where they want to get paid in any given year. Meaning if you hit free agency at the wrong point with the wrong teams, your contracts could be smaller because of that. There is zero change to the franchise tag, which I think is just important to state because obviously when you see, out on the interwebs, a lot of complaining about the franchise tag and what they're doing with it. Some examples this year, AJ Green is one that could be franchised. Dak. I mean, there's just some big names out there. Ngakoue, yeah. And obviously they're always unhappy about that.
Yes, like these are guys that they don't want it.
Yeah.
They would rather be out.
Yep, exactly. I think one thing that's important to mention here, which I think is actually a very good thing on all the way around, however you feel about, marijuana, and that's a country thing, it's a political thing, it's a state thing, it's everywhere. The reality is there's an opioid problem in the United States.
I don't like that.
And there are many, many, many people in the athletic world that are getting addicted to this stuff. Whereas, I think we could all agree that, marijuana is certainly the lesser of two evils, if you even want to consider it an evil.
Oh, yes.
So interesting part is now the going into the preseason, there's going to be a reduction of overall testing period. Going into the beginning of the season, instead of a 4-month window of testing, they've moved it down to 2 weeks. Okay. So
definitely player friendly.
Yeah, whether you know what that means or not, it just means the guys can have a little bit more, we'll call it fun, even though I think it's more than that, for a little longer and still be able to remain clean. Again, I think this is a huge thing. I mean, we cannot deny the physical aspects of the game and what it's done to players physically, and giving them an opportunity to recover or feel less pain is important. They do have lives they've got to live beyond the year. What this is kind of interesting is with this 17-game season and then 3 preseason games, the key for the owners was to get a 10-game home season minimum. Okay, so you're either guaranteed eight season, 2 preseason, or you're going to get 9 regular season, 1 preseason. So they get that win. The other big part of this, going back to the schedule, is this will also implement a 7-team per conference playoff. So 14 total teams, which is an increase of 1 playoff team in each conference this year.
Currently, we have the 6. We have the 4 conference winners, 2 wild cards. So this gives us a 3rd wild card.
Yes.
So how does that work out in terms of schedule for the playoff?
It's pretty simple in the sense that now instead of having 2 bye teams, you're only going to have 1 bye team. So the top team in each conference will get a 1-week bye in the playoffs.
And you will have 2 seed will not get that bye any longer.
2 plays 7, 3 plays 6, 4 plays 5. And what will be cool for the fan, this is an important part for the fan, is on those wild card weekends, you are now going to get 3 games. So instead of the 12 and the 4 o'clock game, you're going to get a 12, a 4, and an 8 or something to that effect.
That 1, 5, and 8.
Yes. As a fan, feed the beast, man. Because when you're gonna take me off the drugs, give me a good blast before I do. Okay, and
that's right.
Give me a lot of games.
That's right.
Here's kind of what, and I don't want to overinterpret it. I just want to leave it for everybody. Is a lot of this last part I'm going to do is going to have a lot to do with the bottom edge of the NFL. I think that's kind of the big thing why you're seeing a lot of the big name players where the increases are really seem to be showing up is going to be on the what we call fringe players. So just as an idea, rookie contracts in the first year of this deal will increase by $100,000. So meaning the floor of a rookie deal increases by $100,000 per year. In the second year, it'll increase to $50,000 more dollars per year. So that's up to $150,000.
So compounding,
yeah. And then every year from then on, it'll increase $45,000 a year. So it's taking care of those guys that are getting the hell beat out of them that may not get all the limelight, but they're going to have a better financial situation.
May never see those enormous contracts.
Yep.
But to your point, like you mentioned earlier, J.J. Watt came out. He wasn't pleased. He's a high-profile player. So what it's telling us is that the big played players, the stars of the league, aren't going to like it, but the people that aren't the stars or in the limelight, as you said, are going to like it. So what does that mean in terms of the vote?
Well, that'll be interesting. I'll get into the vote last because I'm just going to give a recap of where we stand. But it will matter, and that's a very good point. Another side to this is the practice squad. Currently is sitting at 10 players. The practice squad will be included to 12. Those players are non-active on game days, obviously. And in fact, if you know now, of the 40, there's a 53-man roster. I believe I got the number right. It's 45 of them are actually active on game day. So even then, you have inactives of what they consider the standard, your standard 53-man roster. Now, understand the importance of practice squad players. If you take a practice squad player, so this is kind of the difference between the inactives that are on the active roster, that are inactive on game day, versus the practice squad is those practice squad players can be signed by any team. So meaning if you're on my practice squad for the Giants and the Bears like your guy, but the thing they can do is they can't move them to my practice squad. They have to be on my active roster. So part of my 53-man deal.
You got to take a slot for them.
But it gives an opportunity for more guys to get more time.
So as we're talking about the increase in the money, the revenue benefiting those lower end guys.
Now you got 2 more guys earning.
The practice squad guys as well as the 2 additional, but just to begin with, and they get a say in the vote as well.
Yes to the second point. No to the rookie increases I mentioned. What it did, the other part of this I didn't put on my board, but I know is true, is they're guaranteeing practice squad players a $10,500 per week minimum pay, which is what they're going to pay all practice squad guys, which, if you think about that, you're talking about 17 weeks. That's $170,000 a year, to be on the practice squad and never be active. So, but they did increase that amount, I guess, is important. Another couple of other quick points here. This one's going to be on the rookie side again. Right now, you understand when they in the last collective bargaining agreement, or actually 2 ago, if you remember the days of signing quarterbacks and paying them, which at the time was huge money. You were paying. I remember Stafford, I think, was the last quarterback to get one of these, if I remember correctly. Got like $80 million, like $80 million contract, and everybody went like, "Whoa, how is this guy getting paid?" At the time, was getting paid more than half the starters in the league. Going, this guy hasn't done a thing. So in the last agreement, they slotted guys, and that's why you're not seeing holdouts in the rookies' contracts anymore, because they're slotted. They know what they're going to get. But the interesting part of that was you get a 4-year max contract. Well, you get 4-year contracts, and then you have a 5th-year guarantee, which is always escalated, and it's escalated significantly for first rounders, but Correct. It's escalated for everybody.
Yep.
What'll be interesting now is the 5th year salary used to be guaranteed only in the event of injury. As part of this deal, you will see that it's now fully guaranteed, which means you cut them, it's still part of your cap. So because it's fully guaranteed, you're going to see some teams, if this goes through with this kind of option in it, really consider whether they're re-signing these 5th-year deals.
Right.
And if you notice in the world of quarterback, Jameis Winston is a perfect example. After his poor year last year, they were like, do we re-up him? Do we not? Well, they took the risk, and he played, but if he would have gotten injured, he would have been guaranteed. But if he would not have gotten injured, then he would have, he would not have got paid that huge contract that he got. And so, it's going to make teams, the point of it is going to make teams make decisions faster on those guys.
And the negotiations on that 5th year, right, that people are going in now, these rookies with the 5th year option, people are going to get it done before you're going to see end of year 3.
Yep.
Of a rookie deal. People are going to it's going to start it's the next thing that starts to creep earlier and earlier.
Yep. Well, you have what I can't remember what the date is, but it may have already even passed. There's a date at kind of in this point of the year where you have to guarantee their contract for next year. It's before free agency. It's before all that. So again, that's kind of the challenge is are they going to do that? And if you wait too long, plus understand with those huge escalations, particularly on the high end players, when those huge escalations hit, there are massive cap increases to that. So that's just kind of going to be interesting. Teams are going to have to decide. And the last thing that I thought was kind of interesting, I don't know if everybody's aware of this, but the NFL imposed many years ago in one of the collective bargaining agreements, and you'll notice a 3rd-string quarterback is rarely active on a roster, but they're always dressed for the games. Most of them dress them. Because there is a rule that if your 1st-string quarterback gets hurt and your 2nd-string quarterback gets hurt, and the 1st-string quarterback can't come back in, you can play your 3rd-string quarterback, but you cannot bring someone else in for him. You can't bring your 1st or 2nd string. Like, they are disqualified from the game at that point. So it was a safety rule. Like, you only have 2 quarterbacks. You don't want to have a 3rd guy sitting on the bench every week that never plays. But if I get into an emergency, nobody wants to see the punter taking snaps. And that has happened, back in the 80s. I remember that happening a few times. So
it's like a pitcher. Once you put him in, you can't. Once you put this guy in now, that extra quarterback, then you can't, bring your starter back in.
So think about it this way, where it would be a tough decision for a team is, say you get a quarterback, you get to your 2nd-string quarterback, get your 1st-string quarterback gets hurt, say he gets nuked and he's out. Patrick Mahomes gets the knee separation, and his backup comes in, who was it Matt Moore this year, I think who it was? Matt Moore comes in. Now think about this. Now you've seen times where a quarterback like hurts his shoulder, the backup comes in for a couple of plays or a series, and then the starter goes back in. If that scenario happened to your 2nd-string quarterback in that game, he has to come out for a play, he can't go back in. So, again, it was designed to make
stressful.
It's
stressful.
It is. So what they did, which I thought was kind of interesting, is they are now going to do this where you have an emergency offensive lineman, which I think is a good thing, because what teams have had to do in the past is figure out ways to put tight ends in, put guys way out of position. And so it's just an idea of having that ability to help somebody else. It didn't state whether the rules are all the same as the quarterback, but my guess is it is, because it said in the language I read it said it was similar to that. So I would assume. But again, just good things, player safety. I like that. I like I kind of like that mentality. Now, okay, so I've gone through all this stuff, and it's all a lot of gobbledygook in a lot of ways, and for us as fans, it may not be important. But it'll help you hopefully it helps you understand when you hear some of the comments that are coming out, or why this may not go down, where they're coming from. It gives you a little bit of idea. So do you, when you look at this, and I kind of, I rambled on pretty extensively, but when you look at this, anything stick out to you from either the fan, you can take it from a fan perspective or from just how the negotiations might play out?
I mean, I agree with some of the points that are not financially related.
Yep.
I think you brought it up, like the player safety, the drug testing. I think if that's going to drive less use of the opioids, I like the way that the season's cut the extra preseason game. Extra football at the end of the year when it's critical is always fun. But the financial aspect, I mean, I'm not a financial guy. I kind of am taking it for what it's worth.
Yeah, they're kind of just numbers sometimes.
Yeah, and I'm not really deriving my own opinion. It looks fair in my mind, but again, I also know there's so much gray for a guy like me, and even if I did more research and say, okay, well, here's how much revenue this is going to generate, and here's how much this, and here's how many players this 1% or 1.5% from 47 to 48.5 is going to, what it's going to mean per player, of try to break it down. There's just too many numbers for daddy.
Yep. Yeah. It is.
Strap them on and play football. What I don't want the lockout. We've been through those. They suck. But you kind of alluded to it earlier when you were putting this together. You said, as I start to dive into it more, because we were talking about it earlier, just more on the surface. And you said, as I look into it, it looks like, the players may, it's probably better if they negotiate. But it doesn't look as fair for them. And before, when we were just talking about it on the surface, from what you understood and what it's, we still see, the owners are not. They're giving all they're going to give.
This is kind of what's been out there, and you hit on it with all that. The gist of what we're hearing, and I guess first I want to recommend something. We heard it on the radio, and we went and looked it up, and I read it before. There's probably about a maybe 5 to 8 minute read of an article. Andrew Brandt from SI gave a perspective, and he was trying to be very balanced. Understand, you can look at it. It explains it in the article, but to give you an idea, this guy was a VP for the Packers I think it was of player personnel. So he's worked on the team side. He's now currently he's been an agent for 10 years, got law background, obviously, because if you're an agent dealing with contract. He gives a pretty good, I think, breakdown of it, and where he tries not to take sides, but it's very well written. I'm not going to steal his work from him and go about it, but I would recommend it if you're just interested to kind of see where it's from. But what I think most people have come away with that have investigated this far more is that it is the benefit area for the players is certainly on the bottom end of the player spectrum. As far as pay is concerned, as we mentioned, I mean, increasing in rookie contracts, more practice squad players, the minimums for these guys going up, all that, and more games played actually with injury benefits guys getting a chance to play at some point or another.
Right.
So those are, I think, big things that we saw out of it. I could see it. I can see where the arguments are on both sides, and truthfully, I don't really care, if I'm being totally honest. I mean, I may formulate an idea of where I think it should be, but who the hell am I? And the truth of the matter is I got to pay for all this stuff. I'm not the guy getting the money. So
yeah,
I agree with you. I just want him to play, but I think it's important to understand where this is going to go, only because as we start talking about it, one thing just as a note, regardless, salary cap is expected to increase to about $200 million. I believe that's about a $12 $12 million increase going into this year. Whether or not this goes into play, and they have formulations and things that determine salary cap. There's percentages. Like one thing crazy I learned in hockey, for example, because they have multiple Canadian teams, the way they determine the salary cap is actually hugely impacted by the weight of the Canadian dollar, because the American dollar is pretty strong, but when that fluctuates, it can change. The NFL has probably some sort of formula like that, even though it's all American teams, to determine, what is the cap based off of, I would maybe assume, cost of living adjustment, kind of concept.
Yep.
So, you don't know where it's going to go from there, but their thought is that there could be some noticeable increases if this thing is approved.
So from the additional $12 million, if it's approved, you might see another $10 million on there or something.
Yeah. I mean, whatever the number is,
10 or something like that.
And where that goes back to is, again, I think, going back to a casual, and we're going to talk about this in the when we talk about free agents, and that's going to be our next hit. Is, you're talking about quarterbacks, and we're, a $20 million quarterback was not all that long ago was astronomical.
Now
we're talking 30 is like, that's where I start talking.
So Mahomes is in year 3. So at the end of next year, I mean, he could be a $40 million quarterback.
Yeah, they will. Well, this is the thing. He will definitely get extended for obvious reasons. And that's where but if you think his escalator on his contract is going to make him a huge cap hit in his 5th year. So what they'll probably do is renegotiate that before that 5th year to spread that money out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that thing you see. But then if you've got in that same draft class, a Mitch Trubisky, who is clearly not performed to the level of a number 2 overall quarterback, you got to make a decision. And as in the NFL knows, if you don't have a quarterback, you don't have a chance. So teams are going to struggle with some of these decisions. And you got a Dak Prescott who has shown flashes of greatness and times where you're like, what the hell was that? And this guy's out here, you need to pay him. And you just paid Zeke. You got to pay Mari. You got to build your defense. So it's like these teams are struggling with, we're seeing there was a class of quarterbacks, and we've talked about this a lot of times, of about 5 to 6 that have kind of been around for a long time, and they're starting to kind of dwindle. We'll give an example. Probably one of the fringe guys was Phillip Rivers. Obviously, we saw Eli Manning, a 2-time Super Bowl winner. He retired. Brady we're talking about. Is Breeze going to come back? You got Aaron Rodgers getting up there. And this next class that was coming in, and yet we've seen holes in a lot of guys. There's probably 2 guys that you are feeling confident with right now, and that's probably Deshaun and Pat Mahomes.
Speaking of which, okay, side note, because I've been getting into, it's been a while, and I think I told you this the other day. It's been years because I don't have time, but late night I happened to catch pieces of a little of Curb Your Enthusiasm on HBO again.
Yep.
That guy is hysterical, Larry David. So there was an episode that I watched, this new one, and like they were at a funeral for a buddy of theirs who died on the golf course with them. And so the widow was asking Larry, anything seemed strange while you guys were out there, playing before he, keeled over. And he's like, well, he's very stressed out. And she's like, yeah, about what? A lot about the Jets. It's the Jets. And so the whole episode was that she's like, those New York Jets have done worse to my life. They're so awful. I have to live with this. And Larry's like, I'm a Jets fan. And then at the end, he's like, if it all were for that stupid rule, that stupid catch rule, that Austin Safarian-Jenkins scored, we would have been on. And then at the end, like, he got it on. She's like, are you bringing this up again? It's ruined my life. Stop talking about it. And then he's like, whatever. He's walking out. And then she's like, by the way, Larry, Safarian-Jenkins dropped the ball. It wasn't a catch. You get out of it. It's awesome. Oh, anyways, the point is like, Larry's going off. He's like, Deshaun Watson. We took Sam Darnold. Deshaun Watson was sitting there. Oh, shout out to me, my boy D-Dub. D-Dub for life.
And just
making it all over the world.
And that's where it goes. Like, think about it. You got guys like Sam Darnold out there. You got Mitch Trubisky. I mean, I could probably just keep going. You got guys like your Giants are going to, I'm not saying they won't, but they got to see. But, Daniel Jones, where does that guy go?
Him, but
Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota, gone.
And if he doesn't step up in this year to show that he doesn't have to be Superman, but there's definitely a future for him. I mean, the Cardinals have already set the standard. They drafted, was he 1 overall or not even?
No, he was like number 10. Who, Rosen?
Yeah.
He was like 10. He was 10, but he was a first rounder. He's a first rounder.
And very next season, goodbye. We'll take another quarterback in the first round. So the patience is gone.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is all going to kind of play into this. Again, this is more just for if you wanted something to listen to. And I apologize. I was probably talking really fast, but I wanted to get through it.
Let me go back to the question I had earlier, and you said let's talk about it.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
And that was about the again, the lower level guys getting paid more, which means they kind of like this deal. A lot of them have come out and said, I heard interviews with some of the lower level players on teams. Like, I haven't looked into the nuts and bolts of it, but from what I understand, I'm going to probably sign because it's going to benefit them. Why would they not? And then on the flip side, your superstars, a la JJ Watt, you're like, no, screw this, man. It's not fair for us because, we're not, it's not benefiting us. Again, I said it in the car. It's amazing how at this level, the love of the game, this is why we love college football, the love of the game goes right out the window. I also said that the paying the college players and the transfer rule, and all, hopefully it doesn't damage that passion. I have a feeling there could be a little bit, but I think we'll still be able to push through. But that love of the game completely goes out the window because a guy like J.J. Watt is a stand-up guy. He's not a nut like Antonio Brown.
Yep.
And you said it too. That's good. His voice is going to speak volumes. Yep. But even a guy like that, and as good of a person as he is for the league and for his community, and in college, probably would never have thought he had that mindset, but it's obviously not coming into play at all.
Yeah, and I will say this, though. I also do think, as much as it is, listen, none of us really care about millionaires fighting billionaires, as I've said, and many people have said, us in the real world. But I think they also look at it as, well, we have the loudest voices, and while it can appear, and maybe sometimes it's actually real, that they're fighting for themselves, in a way, I think they know the higher I make the ceiling, the more the floor is going to come up too. I think there's some of that mentality. I will say this, just so we understand where we're at. Today is March 3rd, I believe. So there was an initial vote on this by, it's a players, it's a representative committee of the player reps, and it's only 11 people. It was voted on, you want to say like a couple weeks ago. And, it was a 6-5 vote no. Okay. So what they did then is they brought in every team's player rep. So 32 players to take the next vote. They voted 17-14, one abstaining in favor of pushing the deal through. So what does that mean? It means they pushed the vote to the entire group of players. So it's 1,900 people are going to be involved in this next vote. So you understand it only takes the majority.
This is where that was the question I was going to have earlier. So
it's a simple majority.
There's a lot more lower level players and a lot fewer high paid players, superstars.
Sure.
So what does that mean when this vote comes down?
I guess I personally would just trying to some way dip into the mind of a player in this and just thinking about the math of who's making all the money. I mean, certainly the NFL is a 1%er club. The top athletes are making a vast majority of the cash all the way around. So that being said,
what does it take on the vote now? You were getting
it's the vote is a simple majority. So what that means is if there's 1,901 players, we'll use an odd number for a simple. It only takes if it's half and half, and we're talking about 950 and 950, and that last guy votes yes, it goes. If he votes no, it doesn't. It's one vote above the dead even. So, that I think matters because I would dare to say, just if I'm doing some math in my head, that you're more than 50% on the bottom half of the league.
Correct.
And I think the thing...
of those, would you say 1,900? I would think that there's at least 1,000 of them, if not more, that are on the bottom half.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would venture to say
you're
this
already
is probably...
over at that point.
This is going to get passed would be my likelihood. But the other part, what you don't know is understand these player reps are going back to their teams, and this is the hard part about negotiations is... the owners are not negotiating with the end deciders. They're negotiating with a group of player reps that's
Right.
no more than one per team, and they're going back and selling this so they can spin this however they want. And understand, I got data off the internet, and yeah, some of what I got could be wrong because, we know about the internet. So where are these guys getting their information from and how it's spun to them? It's going to be important. The whole hope is one way or the other. I don't really care where the revenue goes because you're taking it out of my pocket as a fan, no matter what.
Right.
I just want them to get it done.
I want the product.
And I want, and sometimes I wish they would do it a little bit more respectfully to the fans in the fact that most of these things don't need to be set out in the public because in the scheme of things, like I said, it doesn't matter to me. The players can get 53%. If the owners are okay with it, fine, but they can have that discussion somewhere else.
Yep.
So we'll see what happens. I think it was interesting. I wanted to know, like what's the big up in arms? Obviously, to the fan, I love an extra playoff team because it gives my crappy team one chance to slide into number 7, and it also gives me an extra week to watch football. Gives me a couple of extra games during the late January time. I don't know.
Good stuff.
I like
stuff.
it.
Taking care of players. It sounds good in theory. Again, we want to just make sure that the product ends up on the field. It's the bit, because we love football, and we understand the NFL and even college is a business, but that's the part we kind of probably like less.
I will say this one part for the fans. I didn't mention this, and I don't know exactly how it works, but no longer, this is probably important, no longer will Goodell be hearing discipline. There will be a neutral arbiter who is going to determine discipline, but my understanding is that Goodell has the ability to change that. Okay. If he's smart, he won't. But if he's not, because he has proven very uneven in this area, which is very disappointing. So that's another area that maybe for the fans more so than anybody, because it's who's going to get suspended, who's going to be there.
People love him.
Yeah.
And you'll just watch the draft.
Yeah.
You come for the first, especially night 1, but the first 10 picks in particular, at least, you'll hear boos. So, but that's it. That's, we're not going to really dwell on this unless we have updates to give. And at that, we'll just touch on it. Because, again, we'd rather not dive into the business side as much. But it's important that we know that because the next conversation is going to be talking, free agency. And then we'll talk combine. Sure. And, all this kind of ties together. So, we back. We bad. You're not black, and I'm not mad.
Lethal weapon.
All right, Gridiron 360, we out. We'll get this out and up. We appreciate you listening. See you next time. As always, where?
On the gridiron.
Oh, I almost forgot that. See you.